Hey troops, welcome back to the channel. My name's Ryan and I'm a former Royal Marines Commando from the United Kingdom, and today we're reacting to a fantastic channel called Task and Purpose. I know a lot of my subscribers go over there and watch his videos, and it's a video titled Why the Russian Army BMP Tank is Worse Than You Think. It's keeping in line with the Russia-Ukraine situation, guys, okay? And the content that Task and Purpose does is always fantastic. The link to that video will be in the description below. Please go show them some love, because at the end of the day, if they didn't do videos like this, channels like myself wouldn't be able to react and put comment on them. So go show them some love, drop a comment, tell them I've been there, all that good stuff. But let's just get straight in the video, guys. Before we do, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. If you like this type of content, please let me know.
How's it going, Spare Parts Army? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Recently, we've seen a parade of Russian military vehicles over the past few weeks, and a lot of people have found them very difficult to tell the difference between all these vehicles. How do you tell the difference between a BTR and a BMP? What is a BMP even capable of doing on the battlefield? And where did the idea originally come from? And at the end of the video, we're going to take a look at the Russian Army's most up-to-date version of the BMP, called the BMP-3.
In this video, we want to examine and analyze what exactly might be wrong with the BMP that it's performing so terribly in the war in Ukraine.
The BMP is kind of like the backbone of the Russian.
I mean, it's slightly it's easy for me to say this, but you know, let's get real. The amount of funding and support that Ukraine is getting indirectly from support nations is overwhelming the Russians. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter how powerful they are on face value. The fact is they're fighting a good 30-odd countries. So it's disguised as one country, Ukraine, but they're fighting a lot more than that because of who's actually supporting Ukraine. That's where they're struggling, all right? Doesn't matter how much good kit you've got when you're fighting a group of aggressors with the same intention of beating you. You know, you're going to find that tough.
Infantry, the ground forces, you see it everywhere. You know what? Scratch that. It's basically the backbone of a lot of different armies. The Ukrainian military uses the BMP, but there are a lot of reports now of their downsides. Could it just be maintenance problems? What's really the truth about the BMP? Like most modern Soviet military developments, the BMP can trace its roots back to World War II. During the war, there was never really a dedicated armor personnel carrier for the infantry, typically forcing them to make do with unarmored flatbed trucks that were widely vulnerable to enemy fire and unable to keep up on poor terrain. After World War
You know, the thing is, we still use vehicles similar to that today across the globe. Those flatbed trucks to get personnel to and from point A to point B on the battle space, although they've came a long way in terms of the mechanics of the vehicles, they do offer little protection to the individuals within them still to this day, guys, okay? They're not designed for ultimate safety in mind. And that's the scary thing about war, all right? A lot of these vehicles that people are transported in, when it comes to transport vehicles, a lot of them aren't really as armed as you'd think. It's mainly the tanks and stuff like that, the ones that are there to cause supreme amounts of damage, that the money goes into putting armor into them, okay? I remember when I was serving at 40 Commando Royal Marines, this was a conversation I had in 2013 or 14 with my then corporal who took us through jungle training. He was a part of armor support group, and they were in Viking vehicles in the early days in Afghanistan. And the horror stories that were coming out, because these things literally had no armor in the early days. So whatever shot at them shot straight through them, killing people inside. And if you think about armor support vehicles, they're going to be prone to attacks from RPGs, grenades, you know, artillery, these types of things. They're going to put a lot more onus on trying to get that out of the battle space. So they were targeted every single day, and thus the casualties for armor support group at the time were through the roof. All right, so when this is only like 9-10 years ago, we was conversating about this, and these stories took place a little over 10 years ago. So if we think about that, it's like, wow, that's pretty modern. All right, we're pretty modern day talking about those stories with kit and equipment that's still kind of outdated. It's a scary thing.
World War II, the Soviets began focusing more on motorizing their force with additional beefed-up vehicles coming in the form of the early BTR and BRR models. Though As a whole, the Soviets were not happy with their vehicle's performance in combat. Development of a dedicated infantry combat vehicle began in the 1960s. The goal was to create a platform that not only could carry infantry, but also support them in the fight once they dismounted. After a few years of rapid development, the prototype was labeled Object 765, later BMP. It was selected and produced by Chelyabinsk tractor plant, although the BMP's effectiveness in agrarian pursuits are a little bit questionable. The BMP-1 was truly the first of its kind as a dedicated infantry fighting vehicle, as opposed to the simply armored personnel carrier doctrines used by other modern militaries at the time. Russia was the first military to adopt a vehicle like this, although technically the first ever infantry fighting vehicle is said to be the German-made Schutzpanzer Lang HS-30, which was created in 1956 during the Cold War by West Germany. The important thing to know about the Schutzpanzer Lang was that it was a major departure from...
I mean, that's an old vehicle, right? 70 odd year ago we're looking there, and that looks pretty cool, man. Where's that video gone?
Military doctrine of the time that, the United States and everyone was using in the West. These battle taxis would see troops riding into battle.
I've never heard that before. Battle taxi. That must be US terminology.
And then dropped off, and the vehicles would let them fend for themselves. They ended up being wrong, and the direction that all militaries went was similar to the BMP. I couldn't find any information on whether the Soviets were inspired by the German Schutzpanzer.
Yeah, so these things are extremely capable on the battle space. It does depend where you are fighting, you got to look at the environment which you're fighting in, but that's kind of the modern day armor support groups of our militaries. The Royal Marines, I can only speak on what I know, and we have armor support vehicles. It's like they're like all-terrain vehicles with tracks, not quite a tank, but they're getting troops very quickly across a lot of different terrains. These things can even partially submerge as well in water. So we were doing land and craft amphibious assaults via these things, literally going ashore via boats in them, and they were fantastic bits of kit. They came a long way in terms of where they are now, in terms of the armor plating and stuff, to be able to actually protect the personnel inside them. I mean, these things look better armored than the original Vikings that we were using, but yeah, that's the different countries adapt different things at different times, right?
Schutzpanzer Lang, that inspired them to make the BMP-1. In any event, the first version of the BMP came standard with 3 main weapon systems. So you had your 73mm smoothbore cannon, which was capable of firing AP, or armor-piercing rounds, or HE high explosive rounds, depending on your target type, if you're targeting personnel or vehicles. So you had your A9M114 launcher, which was meant to tackle more heavily armored targets like main battle tanks. And last but not least, you had your Pkt Coaxial Machine Gun. Coaxial means that basically it's a machine gun welded straight onto the turret, so it points where the turret points. It's actually kind of an antiquated design choice today, but back then it was all the rage. The crew consisted of a driver, a gunner, and a commander, and then you had 8 infantry in the back who were able to dismount, or actually originally they could fire out of the side of the vehicle.
This is, don't underestimate the capability of a very small team like that. If you think about it, you've got an armored vehicle coming towards you with, it's got multiple weapon systems on there that is capable of, firing back at other armed support vehicles or troops personnel on the ground, as well as it's got, a section strength of men in the back who can get out and kick your ass afterwards as well. So these, I can imagine, being very, very effective back in the day. In terms of armored infantry, I can't really speak too much on that matter, because Royal Marines aren't specifically armoured infanteers. So we've got the Fusiliers and people like that in the United Kingdom, where they will take up the armoured role, all right, using vehicles like this, but a lot more modern versions, and getting across the battle space. We tend to use our Mark 1 people carriers, which is our boots, to get us from point A to point B. We don't use vehicles, certainly not these ones anyway.
out of these little dedicated portholes on the vehicle side. Those portholes have since then been the focus of a lot of fuss and debate in the military community, with everyone pretty much really disliking them. Shooting out of the portholes is laughed at these days. By placing those holes in the armor, it weakens the armor, and it does very little in the way of adding combat power in return. Sure, there are some additional situational awareness, but I don't know. No thanks. The vehicle was designed to help mitigate radiation effects in the case of nuclear weapons.
Wow.
To add to all of this, it was also an amphibious vehicle, meaning it could easily cross bodies of water directly without the need of external engineering support.
So this looks completely different to a Viking, and we'll maybe cover that in another video, guys. But the whole concept is the same. It's about being able to be multifunctional across the many different types of terrains and stuff,
which would slow battlefield tempo. We've seen, for instance, in the battles in Ukraine, where the Ukrainian armed forces, they've been destroying bridges to slow down the Russian army advance. Technically, these tanks should be able to cross some of these rivers, but the conditions, if they're not perfect for crossing, then it's not really gonna work. And with that being said, if you were to ask me if I would volunteer to sit in the back of one of those vehicles while it drives through deep water, I'd ask you to go kindly fuck off. The BMP platform saw its first combat in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War with the Egyptian military, where it was received with kind of mixed reviews. While it did excel in its battlefield taxi role, easily keeping up with armored tanks across the battlefield and protecting infantry, it was kind of lackluster in its actual fighting capabilities. Crews reported, for instance, that the 73mm cannon was really noticeably inaccurate and unreliable. And being that it was only a single shot, it had to be manually reloaded after every round, making rates of fire lower than needed for follow-up shots.
Also, if it's not accurate, you've got to be really, you've got to be very careful when you shoot. All right, tactical awareness has to be through the roof when you're using that weapon system, simply because the chances are you missing are quite high anyway. And what's going to happen with the enemy when you're trying to shoot at them and you miss? Well, it's going to bring all eyes on you, and you then become a bigger target than you previously were. You might not have been known to the enemy at that point. So, accurate weapon systems are a must in this situation. It goes without saying, guys, you need an accurate weapon system anyway. But on a tank, when its primary job is to protect the lives of those inside it, yeah, it needs to be it needs to be foolproof. It needs to be accurate.
Russian crews also had a lot of complaints about the vehicle in their training. Non-export Russian models contained autoloaders, which were reportedly even slower than hand load and dangerous to operate. The vehicle was also incredibly front heavy, which is not ideal for amphibious operations because the nose of the vehicle could get caught in the mud while you're trying to cross a river. To address these issues, a series of stopgap solutions were made to improve the design, while work began on an entirely new model of the BMP, the aptly named BMP-2. Genius! So it had its first production run in 1980, and it brought in a slew of new quirks and features. While the chassis was nearly identical, it did add some additional armor and adjustments to whole crew layout. The largest improvement to this version of the BMP came with its fancy new turret design. Previously, the BMP-1 had a one-man turret with just a gunner sitting all by his lonesome. The BMP-2 introduced a two-man turret with the commander now sitting with the gunner, and most importantly, he had a complete weapons overhaul.
I have a theory about why the Russian BMP might be performing so poorly in Ukraine right now, and that's because they're still using a lot of these old BMP-2s.
I knew he was going to say that. Now, this is a story that, if there was ever a story that defines the Russian military, it's using old-fashioned, out-of-date, archaic weapons and weapon systems and tactics in some way. We've seen that in Ukraine. They've got all the potential to be extremely powerful given the number of troops that they have, given the number of equipment that they have, but a lot of it's outdated, and there's no good having those numbers when they're all old. It's as simple as that, unless you are keeping up with modern technology, your numbers doesn't matter what your numbers are. You could give me 100 modern, up-to-date fighting soldiers with all the best kit, equipment, training, experience, and exposure, over 100,000 ill-trained, poorly equipped, old-fashioned mentality soldiers. This to me is really important, especially now that we're in the technical age. Okay, it just goes without saying, really, and I think that's where Russia's superpower kind of fear came from. But we're starting to find out that actually a lot of this kit that they're using is 20, 30, 40 years old. Some of this kit and equipment might have been used back in the day with the early wars that the Russians were fighting, you know, the obvious ones of that. And it's crazy, guys. And, you know, they're doing so poorly because they're just not fit for service anymore. You know, we can't expect the British military to be using the old white rifles that they were using back in the day, you know, the single shot loaders and stuff like that. It just wouldn't work in today's theater.
Soviet era tanks. All they have is this IR spotlight that shines a giant infrared spotlight out so they can only see within like 100 meters. It's a really terrible night fighting capability. So it appears like the Russian military has really failed to upgrade the turret systems on all of these BMPs. So there's no advanced targeting systems and there's no stabilization, which allows gunners to fire on the move. So it looks like they were really hoping to be able to rely on the explosive reactive armor to defeat javelins or any incoming missile projectile, but it looks like it's unable to defeat modern anti-tank systems. We'll get into—
I just think the military powers at B within the Russian military quite simply don't care enough. Those losses don't really make that much of an impact on their consciousness, on their conscious, you know? I don't think they care like we care. And I say we, the majority of the Western world, I don't think there's that care there, which is a shame because it's real lives, human beings here being affected. But yeah, I mean, if it doesn't make sense, it's probably because they don't care as much.
Into some more of the flaws in just a minute.
So the 73mm cannon was replaced with a 30mm autocannon. They also upgraded the launcher so it was capable of firing the AT-4 and AT-5 anti-tank guided missile systems. The 30mm gun was completely a game changer, going from being this unreliable single-shot weapon to a fully automatic link-fed weapon capable of firing 550 rounds per minute. Not only did it have a longer range and more accuracy, but it was much more effective against the targets that it was expecting to encounter. This was especially effective in the Soviet Union war in Afghanistan in the late 1970s and 1980s, as the 30mm cannon allowed for a much higher angle of elevation, meaning that they could engage targets that were placed in the mountainous terrain. Crews that were still using the BMP-1 would often get caught in ambushes from high angles and be completely unable to engage targets. After the war,
yeah, that's a scary situation to be in, literally because your barrel doesn't point up far enough to not be able to point that weapon system in the enemy's direction. I couldn't imagine that feeling, all right? It's something that we take for granted in modern militaries where, you know, we might complain about how we get funded in the military and stuff like that, but in all honesty, a lot of the kit and equipment that I was exposed to, it worked really well. It was effective. And, you know, obviously there's a few minor kind of quarrels that we used to have about the SA-80 A2, for instance, and the A3. It had a massive hard time because of the A1 variant, but the A2 was all right. The A3 was even better. Was it effective? It got us through Iraq and Afghanistan pretty good, and it's continuing to give the British military a good reputation, so it can't be that bad. The few minor kind of quarrels that people had was the cleaning of the weapon system, all right, because, you know, allegedly other weapon systems out there you didn't have to clean as much, which I've got news for you guys. Yeah, you do. You got to clean every weapon system pretty much, okay? It's just the nature of the beast. You shoot it, it gets full of carbon. You got to clean that shit off. It's Billy Basic stuff, really. So I understand what it's like to have a few problems with weapons and kit and equipment, but it's the usual gripes that people complain about, like, oh, I don't have to clean this, or it might rust a little bit more than that. But, you know, the grass isn't always greener with different weapon systems. But in terms of using old stuff that's proven to be crap, it looks like Russia is using a lot of old crap kit. Simple as that.
In Afghanistan, the BMP-2 began to be sold to numerous other Soviet-friendly nations, with over 30 countries in total eventually adopting the platform. And they eventually created different versions of their own to suit their own needs in those countries. Just like new privates in basic training, they might all look the same, but they're all special in their own way. The BMP-2 and its modernized version
I love this guy,
serve in the
man.
Russian military to this day, and for good reason. The BMP overall is a simple design, meaning that it's easier to fix, easier to operate, and generally more reliable, although now we've seen with the new reports that if you don't maintain it, it doesn't matter how reliable it is. This is the kind of quality you want your equipment to have when you rely on them in large numbers. If it stops working, just bang it with a hammer a few times and then get it back into operation. Now, obviously, there's going to be extents to how far you can push this vehicle. I would say that the AK is definitely more reliable. That thing, you can really just put it in the mud and then it still is fine. The BMP, it's a vehicle. It needs love and care. The 30mm autocannon is still...
Yeah, AK-47 goes without saying, fantastic weapon system. It doesn't mean to say they're all great though. There's some crap AK-47 variants out there that have been literally stuck together with glue and pieces of wood. But the ones that are made good, the ones that are adopted by formed military groups, and they're paying decent money to get a decent weapon system, I think they're among probably one of the best assault rifles that a man can get. In my opinion anyway. I think the fantastic bits of kit. Bloody loud though. 7.62, yeah, they're going to cause a lot of damage, but these things are loud. The weapon, the munitions, the ammunition for it weighs a lot more, obviously, because it's a heavier round. So pros and cons with this weapon system, but majority of the time I think it's a good weapon system to have.
A formidable weapon system to this day, able to fire multiple round types from different targets. So upgrades to the number and type of ATGM launched from the BMP have also kept pace with modern tank development, with most carrying multiple Kornet missile launchers, which pose a serious threat to any armored target, although we don't know how many of these vehicles are actually outfitted with it in the Russian military. While the 1.9 million American dollars might seem a bit steep for your average working class Russian, when compared to other platforms available, it's a steal. It's the Toyota Corolla of armored vehicles. It's not flashy by any means, but if you throw enough of them at a problem, you're probably going to get the job done. Before we get into the latest and most powerful version of the BMP-3, check out this playlist on all of the military vehicles that we've covered on this channel, including all the military equipment that the...
Yeah, and I'd just like to reiterate, go check this channel out, guys. Show them some love from me. I do really like and appreciate this channel existing.
To push the BMP design and began developing a new model of the BMP in the early 1980s. While the BMP-2 was still being fielded to Soviet units, it was still very aptly named, you guessed it, the BMP-3. The original full name for the BMP-3 was The Return of Stalin, but it didn't pan out well with focus groups. While the BMP-2 was largely designed as an upgraded BMP-1, the BMP-3 was an entirely new design, and it began full-rate production and manufacturing in 1987. The first and most noticeable change here is the new 100mm main gun. Needless to say, this brings an entirely new level of firepower to the platform. It's capable of firing the 9M117 Bastion anti-tank guided missile, as well as high explosive fragmentation rounds to target troops in cover. Going with the mentality that more is better, it still has a 30mm cannon coaxially attached, capable of firing the same kind of round as the BMP-2 and the 7.62 machine gun, because more is more. Now, the obvious drawback to having that many weapons on a troop carrier is that it limits the amount of ammo that the vehicle can practically carry. But because each weapon system is used for very specific target types, it means there won't be a lot of ammunition overlap, which isn't great. A target that you would use the 100mm for is a different target than the 30mm, and the same for the machine gun. This is different than the Bradley's philosophy, which really goes Oprah style, hands out 25mm to the entire crowd. According to reports, which I do not honestly know how much we can trust these Russian reports on their vehicles, so take it with a grain of salt, but the BMP-3 is said to be able to fire stationary, moving, or even when it's afloat in the water, with the same level of accuracy, which is a pretty impressive thing if it's true. It has a 27...
Based on the fact that that's a Russian report, I'm going to go with the fact that that's probably largely false. I don't think it's going to be the same level of accuracy doing all of those different types of activities. Do I think it can do that? Yeah, I would say in 2022 it has the capabilities of probably being able to do it, but accurately, that's a whole different ball game, especially when it comes to tanks. I mean, you think about the different variables going through water and stuff like that, you know, and trying to fire on a position as accurately as you would without being in the water. I don't see it being as accurate, period.
horsepower to tonnage ratio, I think that's how you say it, the vehicle is fast traveling at 72 kilometers per hour on the road. The logistics claims for the vehicle are that it can go up to 600 kilometers in operational range, which I don't know if I really believe that, because the circumstances under which the vehicle can drive that long without fuel doesn't seem likely. After what we've seen so far of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I have begun to seriously doubt the effectiveness of the BMP-3. To be fair, a lot of destroyed vehicles that we saw so far were the older BMP-1 and 2 generation. According to open source intelligence on the matter, we believe that the Russians created around 2,000 of these BMP-3s so far, although I don't know if I believe that number either. The BMP-3 had a completely redesigned hull. It takes an unconventional design approach by putting the engine in the back of the vehicle. This is different than most IFV designs because you typically want to maximize the space in the rear so that dismounted troops can more easily get in and out of the vehicle quickly. So the engine is mounted below the troop compartment as opposed to the front of the hull like previous designs.
That to me doesn't seem a good idea, especially when the fact that you're going to have troops sitting on top of that thing. I don't know how happy I am about that. I mean, you got to take in a number of things that could potentially go wrong. I mean, the weather, for one, you're fighting in Afghanistan in that thing, that's going to be heating up. It's going to be hot as hell in the back. I mean, I don't think that you should... I think that's a design flaw. I don't know much about... I'm not going to say I'm an expert on this stuff, but... yeah, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments, man. I think that's a bit of a design flaw.
This was a trade-off, as it made the crew compartment more cramped in the back for dismounts, but it afforded additional armor to the front of the vehicle for protection. The vehicle claims to have protection against small arms rounds that are bigger than the American .50 caliber bullet, so it claims to be able to stop up to a 12.7mm round and possibly even greater. The BMP-3 really represents the final evolution of the BMP series as it applies to Russian doctrine. The overall Russian strategy focuses on speed and overwhelming firepower, which is why it's been such a devastating disaster for them, this invasion. The BMP-3 achieves this with a numerous amount of weapon systems, meaning it doesn't have to wait for more heavily armored units to engage targets. It rivals American vehicles in terms of off-road performance, that I believe is true. It has high reliability if you maintain it, meaning that it has less of a chance of breaking down while on missions if you maintain it, and it includes amphibious capabilities, meaning additional bridging assets won't be necessary. The BMP-3 is fully equipped to rapidly take the fight to any target anywhere it might be. Now, the BMP is currently slated to be replaced by the Krugernauts 25, Russia's latest and greatest development in the world of infantry fighting vehicles. But due to the widespread distribution of the BMP, modernizations of the platform, its relevance on the modern battlefield, even Ukraine, everyone uses this, and its countless numbers of derivatives and variants, some more practical than others, means that the BMP will be a staple of mechanized warfare for decades to come. Let us know what you think of the BMP. What do you think its real capability?
Right, so I'll tell you straight away what my thoughts are on that. When something notoriously doesn't work out, normally what should happen is you just get rid of it. Instead of spending fortunes in military cases, you're normally talking multiple millions, if not billions, to try and improve these things. I know I was talking about the SA-80 assault rifle beforehand, but the amount of money that was spent on that thing to make it up to the standard to which I enjoyed and liked, it was a lot of money, and it took a long time, 20, 30 years, guys, okay, to get this weapon system, you know, up to a really good standard, or standard that it should have been from the start. Now, if they'd just scrapped that idea and adopted a new weapon system, an M4, or something different, all right, then we would have seen, you know, we wouldn't have seen all of that wastage of money, and we would have had an effective weapon system. A C8 or something would have been better, you know, straight away, and it would have cost a lot less as well. So sometimes you've got to weigh it up. Is it worth trying to make something better? Is it good trying to polish a turd? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much glitter you put on it, it's still a turd. And this thing, for me, the BMP tank, seems to be just a polished turd, and they need to get rid of it, all right? It's just got glitter on it now. That's it. But that's the way, yeah, that's the way I think anyway, guys. But if you like this one, please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below if you think the BMP is actually fit for purpose, or should they just scrap it, and go and show this channel some love, guys. It is Task and Purpose. They're doing pretty good on YouTube at the moment. 609,000 subscribers. So, yeah, brilliant channel they've got. I really enjoyed this. Thank you, guys. Take it easy.